Welcome to Farm to Stable, a science-based equine nutrition podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nettie Liebert. I'm a lifelong horse person and professional equine nutritionist with the goal of helping horses and their humans create balanced diets to set them up for success, no matter what age, discipline, or circumstance. Disclaimer, the information discussed here is based on current scientific research and is for educational purposes only. Every horse's individual needs vary. This is not a substitute for veterinary medicine or nutrition consultation. Welcome to Farm to Stable, an equine nutrition podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nettie Liebert, and welcome back once again to another winter edition, at least here in North America, of Farm to Stable. And just as we're in the holidays, and the temperatures here have been a little wild, going from in the teens in Fahrenheit up into the 50s, so pretty wild swings, and just thought it would be a good reminder to go over some winter hydration tips and how to keep your horse drinking water. As we know, when temperature swings, sometimes they can get a little extra fussy. So let's get right into it. So remember that the average adult horse, about 1,100 pounds or 500 kilograms, needs about 10 gallons of water every day just for normal body functions, just for regular metabolism. And when water intake is reduced, we run the risk of increasing the risk of colic. And remember that in many parts of the world where it's winter now, we're relying more on hay instead of pasture. And hay actually contains less water compared to fresh pasture. So making up for that water intake is also going to be critical for not only reducing the risk of colic, but also to help regulate body temperature, especially as horses age. So the more forage or hay that a horse consumes, the more water is needed to keep all that forage moving through the digestive tract. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But first, in the cold, you may have noticed that your horse may not be as motivated to drink as they may be in the hot weather or when they're working pretty hard, but there are things you can do to encourage them. So first, typically everyone's go-to is to add an electrolyte to the feed. Even more simply, if you don't have access to a commercial electrolyte, you can add a tablespoon of salt to the feed or the mash or whatever you're feeding. But be mindful that some horses don't like that much. Now, you can divide that up. You could do a teaspoon in the morning, a teaspoon at night, a teaspoon at lunch, something like that. That's totally fine. You don't have to do that all at once. But you do have to make sure that your horse eats the ration that you're mixing in an electrolyte or salt with. They may object to it, and if you have a really fussy one, they might refuse to eat it altogether, and that doesn't do you any good either. So you can always do a test ration and make sure that they'll eat it. And again, you can start with a smaller amount and maybe work up to a tablespoon, something like that. Now that amount is for about an 1,100-pound horse. If you have a pony, maybe you want to do a teaspoon a day. And if you have a larger draft horse, maybe you want to do a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons per day. So it's all a little bit relative. But salt does help stimulate the thirst reflex and will help encourage a horse to seek water, to drink water. And remember, that doesn't mean that you don't need to have a salt block available for your horse to lick at. Do that. Keep that available. They'll still seek it out. But if you want to just give them a little extra incentive to drink water, an electrolyte or some salt can help do that. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is water temperature. So there was a study done at the University of Pennsylvania in the mid-90s, and we reference this study a lot, but sometimes people get the interpretation a little bit off. So here's what the study said. So what they did was they took a bunch of ponies and they provided water temperature at different temperatures, near freezing and then around room temperature. So they found that ponies drank about 40% more water when all of the water sources were warmed compared to the amount they drank when all of the water sources were near freezing. So when the water was a little warmer, they wanted to drink more. Makes sense, especially if it's cold out. Now, keeping water a little bit warmer when it's freezing outside can be a challenge. There are some things you can do. You can invest in an insulated or even a heated bucket or a stock tank heater, but you need to follow the directions very carefully. When they're installed properly, they can be very useful during cold snaps, but just remember to keep that water clean. Make sure that the plugs and cords you're using are in good repair. Obviously, you want to minimize the risk of fire and make sure that they are, here in the U.S., UL approved or approved for outdoor and agricultural use. Very, very important. But the heated or the insulated buckets could be an option. Insulated buckets are not going to require electricity. So if you are concerned about that, that could be a good option for you. Now, as I mentioned earlier, usually when it's cold, we're going to give a horse more forage, more hay to help them keep warm. But as we do so, that's also going to mean that they're going to need more water to properly digest all of that forage. And the lack of water can inhibit all that fibrous material from moving properly through the digestive tract, therefore increasing the risk for colic, which we want to avoid. Now, you may see your horse eating snow, which is totally fine, but that's generally not going to be enough. Snow is not an acceptable substitute for water. Okay, so let me say that again. Snow and licking ice is not an acceptable substitute for water. You need to keep those water sources open, free of ice, and available, and if possible, a little bit warmed to entice your horse to keep drinking. Some horses, I know, are picky drinkers, but there are a few strategies you can employ to maybe give them a little enticement to have a little more. Now, we already talked about warming the water, but you want to keep it clean, of course. I know scrubbing buckets in the freezing weather is not fun. I know, I've done it, I do it, I sympathize. Even if that means breaking up the ice that forms in buckets or troughs, very, very important. You might have to do that multiple times per day, especially here in North America. If you're in the upper Midwest or if you're in Canada, I'm sure you have plenty of strategies. You could even probably give me a few new tips on that. So clean and free of ice, obviously very key. And don't forget that you still need to keep that salt lick available. Did I say that already? I know I did, but just a little reminder there. That goes all year round. Now, if you have several horses that are sharing a single water source, you want to make sure that that source is big enough for more than one horse to drink from at the same time. Because you might have a bully who guards the water. I've seen horses do this and won't let other horses near the water source. So you might need a second water source, or you may need to separate that horse and give him his own water source to guard so that he's not preventing other horses from drinking. In addition to the obvious, right, providing ample, clean sources of water, some other ways you can help increase your horse's water consumption is you can soak whatever they are eating. And I know I've said this before on this podcast. Some people are a little hesitant to soak things. You do not have to be. So if the horse is getting a grain concentrate or soaked beet pulp, or you're providing a regular bran mash, that's all fine. Those things all can be soaked with plenty of water. Make it warm if you can, not hot. Remember, you don't want your horse to burn his lips. If it would burn your mouth drinking, say, a hot cup of tea or hot chocolate, it would probably burn your horse too. So make sure it's nice and warm, but not scalding hot. But soaking the feed, soaking beet pulp, soaking bran mashes as part of their horse's regular diet can help increase water intake. This includes, of course, hay cubes as well. You can soak the hay a little bit, but it might freeze up before the horse finishes it. So remember that. And of course, I just did this yesterday. I went out and my horse left just a little bit of beet pulp in his bucket and it was frozen. So of course I had to take in the feed bucket, scrub it out, make sure it was all clean for the next day. So keep an eye on that too. Some people opt to flavor their horse's water with something. You could use something like peppermint oil or maybe some other type of flavor that your horse likes. Now, keep in mind, if you do use something like peppermint oil, it's really strong. So you do not need much, maybe a drop or two for a 5-gallon bucket, and that will provide the scent, a little bit of the taste, or that's 5 gallons or 20 quarts. But if you decide to do that, we've used that as a trick, say if you're traveling to a horse show and your horse is a little funny about a new water source. Same for trying to get them to drink even at home. if you opt to do that, make sure you provide another bucket or another water source that has no flavoring in it. Because if your horse absolutely just does not want that flavored source, you want them to have a regular plain source that they're used to, so that they are willing to drink and that you're not scaring them off from drinking everything. So that one you have to do with a little bit of caution and a little bit of observation and see how your horse reacts to that. And again, you do not need a lot of flavoring. Same thing goes for electrolytes. There are a number of electrolytes that can be mixed right into the water. You can just dissolve them in. Again, if the water is very, very cold, it might not dissolve all the way or take longer to dissolve, but that is an option too. And that will maybe add some flavor to the water and still encourage your horse to drink. But same thing, you still need to have a plain source of water with nothing added to it, just right out of your hose or whatever you use to fill your horse's water, just in case they absolutely object to having something in their water. And even if you think, oh, my horse will drink that, he'll be fine, I know him well, they can surprise you. Ask me how I know. So just keep that in mind. You might have to experiment with it. And when the water warms up, if you don't want to do all of that experimentation now, maybe you could also try it when the weather is a little more pleasant, so that once the temperatures drop again next year, your horse will already be a little bit used to it. So you don't have to do all the experimentation when your fingers and toes are freezing out there in the barn. In summary, couple things. Clean, fresh water. If you're able to safely keep the water warm or above freezing temperature, that's a great way to help encourage your horse to drink, whether it's a bucket heater, an insulated bucket, or a heated bucket itself, whatever is safe for your barn and your situation. Again, making sure you use things in good repair that are approved for that kind of use. Soaking any kind of beet pulp or feed that you give your horse every day, and making sure that they are drinking, keeping buckets and water sources free of ice, keeping them clean as best you can when the weather is less cooperative. So just basic horsemanship, right? So always thought it would be a good reminder. And if you have additional ideas, hey, I'd love to hear them. Send an email to equinenutritionphd@yahoo.com, or you can find us on Facebook at Liebert Equine Nutritional Consulting. So I'd love to hear your ideas on keeping your horse hydrated through winter. These are some of the basics that we talk about a lot about in the research and in the popular press. And maybe you've gotten a new idea here today. Well, either way, I hope you stay warm as you're riding, or maybe not riding, in the colder months wherever you are. I know if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you're enjoying some summer right now. So enjoy that. And thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a very happy and healthy 2025, and we will see you in the new year. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Farm to Stable, a science-based equine nutrition podcast. Please share and subscribe if you found the content interesting. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear about, send it to equinenutritionphd@yahoo.com.